mic up all the way. There we go. Hey. A bit of an impromptu stream this morning just because I had a few spare hours and I was going to use them to work on my game, so I thought I might as well stream it because it's just a nice way to end the week. So hello to everyone who has maybe randomly popped in on YouTube or Twitch and doesn't know this channel. Most of what I do on this channel is kind of streaming and giving feedback on other people's games, and then occasionally I dip into my own projects. But I'm going to be... got like 2 hours now, and I find these kind of blocks of time where you've got like a specific amount of time to use can be really helpful because it just makes you hurry up a little bit. It's like the deadline effect but applied to, you know, a smaller block of time. So give us a shout in chat, let us know what you're doing today, whether you're at work, whether you're working on projects, whether you're doing family home stuff. Just nice to be working with some other people for kind of body doubling and accountability. But I'm gonna kind of talk through a little bit of where I'm at with this project for the benefit of people who either haven't seen my game for a while or who have never seen it, and also, you know, thinking out loud for my own benefit. So I'm making a procedural platformer. It feels like it's kind of a spiritual successor to Spelunky or something like that. I've heard other people describe it that way as well. But it has a deck building element where you are building the rooms as you go. So as you know, progress through a run, you build like a big Metroidvania map. We released a sort of public alpha of it in December just to get some feedback on which parts of the core game people were finding fun. And since then, well, I've took some time off because I had some family stuff, a bereavement, moving house, lots of stuff going on. That meant I had to dip out. I'm very, very lucky to have another dev working on this with me who is doing like blocks of freelance time on it and like helping me out with the stuff that I'm not so kind of technically capable at. A lot of the like big kind of game flowy, systemic, you know, data wrangling, save systems, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, we've just recently had a big design pivot, or are in the middle of one. And that means I've got loads of new work, but it's good because I kind of feel like I have a better idea of what the end release version of this game will or should be. And the problem I was kind of... the last big round of changes, if you haven't seen this, is like I did a big kind of art pass over the whole game, so you can see there's all these kind of swirly clouds and stars in the background, and the player character Lem, the golem, has been upgraded. And the previous kind of theming or story for the game was that you were a golem made by an evil wizard, and then you went out and did like little missions for him and collected like treasure for him and brought his dinner home, and it was kind of a nice story grounding. But the way that the game was structured was like you'd go out on a run and then you'd come back to the castle, and then there would be little bits of dialogue and story in the castle, kind of like the home village in a Diablo game, or the villages that you visit in Shovel Knight or something like that. And I kind of, it felt like, and I think other people will have had this feeling about their projects before, it felt like there was this big, it's like an elephant in the room, it's sort of like shadow in the corner of the project where it was like there's loads of undefined stuff over there and I don't really understand how it works, and the fact that I don't want to engage with it and think through those design problems to me is like a bit of a red flag. And we had these sort of mechanics and systems in the game that were for cooking, because one of the things I learned very early on in this game was that this type of platformer that is based on kind of, you know, I guess SNES era Mario, where you can like pick objects up and carry them around and throw them and do all of that kind of Spelunky type stuff. You want to really just maximize the amount of stuff where the player is like picking something up in one room and taking it to another room and throwing it at things and all of that kind of stuff, because that's just like helping you to make the most of those core mechanics. And when you tie it in with this room building thing that we've got here, that then adds another layer, because the player has to learn, oh, that type of room has this type of thing in, and that type of room has this type of thing, and then they can deliberately like work that system alongside the core mechanics of picking stuff up and carrying them around and throwing them and stuff. So we had cooking as part of that system, and it's very simple cooking where like everything can be cooked in a cauldron. You just throw 2 items into the cauldron, and then there's like a dictionary in the game that says if you put milk and I don't think we actually have any recipes that use milk yet. If you put my favorite one is if you put a piece of meat in a cauldron and then you put an arrow from an arrow trap, it makes a shish kebab, right? So there's loads of little recipes that just work from combining 2 objects, and we've tried not to make it too realistic and simulationist. So basically, if the recipe has some kind of like carbohydrate ingredient like pasta or flour, we just sort of assume that gets added magically, right? So you know, if you put fruit and meat in a dish, it becomes like a tagine, like a kind of meat curry type thing, like a North African meat curry, that kind of stuff. It's very cartoonish in terms of how the cooking works. But the ways that you could use the cooking in the game was like you could cook something and take it back to your boss, and that would give you a currency, and that kind of tied into the story okay. But also there were like little shops where you could cook meals and give them to this gnome, and he would give you money and stuff. And that was fine from like a gameplay perspective, but it wasn't very intuitive in terms of thematics, because when you see a shop in a video game, you assume that you're going to be selling and buying things. And these were like, the closest equivalent would be like that box in Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley where you put your wares in and you just get money for it. And it didn't really make that much sense. So I thought, okay, instead of just having like 1 or 2 of these little shops where you can sell food items, what if we rethemed this around like serving customers like that are diners, and they want specific things, and that means you have to run all around the level and look for the things they want. And the things they initially want can be very simple things that are very easy to find, and then later on they can become much more combinatorial, where you need to like get a milk from here and get a fruit from here and combine them and make a pie or something and then give it to them. And so we kind of have started pivoting in that direction and really just going into much more of a kind of goofy dungeon meshy type cook serve delicious type thing, where it's like this kind of psychedelic fantasy environment that's quite fun and goofy, kind of like Adventure Time. And you know, I rethemed, because initially I was thinking the golem that you play as might have a couple of different cosmetics where you can dress him up different ways, and the chef outfit might be one of them. But I just thought, well, if we narrow it down to being a chef, that's a much clearer offer to the player of what this game is about, right? You just immediately understand what you're doing. And the actual gameplay of having these diners that are dotted around the level that you need to get specific things for just means there's so much more to do in a run now. And some of this I've just kind of hacked it in a kind of prototype feature level, but these 3 berries up here are basically where I've taken a couple of different diners orders. So if I restart the level, this is my placeholder ship that we'll talk about in a minute. But so it's there's places where diners can spawn. This is too many at the moment. In the real game, there might just be 1 or 2 near the start, and then maybe you can get an upgrade that means that you'll start off with more at the start. But as I walk past them, I take their order, and it goes up here, and I can see, okay, I need a mushroom, I need a carrot, I need 2 carrots, 2 carrots, 2 mushrooms, and a piece of fruit. And as a debug thing, I've put some barrels here that just have a bunch of random food in as well, so I can kind of quickly test some of the kind of UX and UI around these guys. Okay, there's a couple of things there that we can use. So it gets a little bit annoying when you've got objects stacking, and I think I'm going to have to... Maybe that's not going to happen too much in the real game when you don't have all of these barrels together, but I might also have to do something where they kind of nudge each other out the way. Okay, so you can see now they've got... the customers that want a carrot have become highlighted, and they've got a marker above them. And that was one of those things where, you know, I quickly roughed the feature in, and then I realized that when you were carrying the item around, you didn't have any way of knowing who wanted it, because they only give you their speech bubble when you're standing right next to them. So I made it so that they now do that, and then you can throw that. And I'm thinking it might be fun later on to have some stuff based around throwing the food. Like maybe there's a... Because this has kind of Slay the Spire type relics where you pick them up and then they give you like a game-altering power-up for the rest of that run. It might be funny to have one that like gives you massive tips for throwing the food at people or something like that. I thought that might be amusing. And then yeah, also because of the retheme to being a sort of buff chef, I changed the attack to be this sort of set of random single frames of swinging a massive wooden spoon. And even though I haven't really changed anything at a programmatic level, the just hitting stuff feels so much better, because it was like a little punch before, and now we've got more visible reach from that. We've got that kind of anime swipe that just makes it a lot clearer where your hurt box is as a character. And it just feels much more satisfying to have your character whacking things. I've also got a proper run animation, which I didn't have before. The run previously was a walk that was sped up. The character was a little bit more squat and chibi. Just made him look a little bit more buff and heroic without losing them being sort of charming and goofy. So I'm getting a little bit of lag, but that might be because I'm streaming today. So if it looks a bit choppy, that's happening on my end of my computer. But yeah, I did a big aesthetic pass before I started doing this pivoting to making it more about the cooking. I put in all this stuff like, you know, new backgrounds, this kind of particle system that paints the sky. And what that does is it kind of it works out what type of room you're currently in, and it does a different type of sky based on what type of room you're in. I've got some weird stuff with the levels not lining up here that is just because this whole area is new. Oh. So what I'm going to do today is just kind of take you through a bunch of stuff I've been working on, and then I'm going to look at my backlog and see what kind of quick things there are I can do that will take me 10 minutes. So this will eventually be kind of like the main character's traveling kitchen ship, like a kind of space galleon that has a little kitchen on it. So imagine it being like, you know, having all pots and pans hanging off of it. And then when you finish your run, because if you die during the run, you kind of lose all the gold you earn. And maybe we'll have like an upgrade to take the edge off of that, where, you know, if you buy a certain upgrade, then you save 10% of the gold from when you died, or 20% of the gold from when you died. That's a nice kind of upgrade to have in a roguelite to, you know, people can opt out of it if they want to go for the higher risk reward stuff, but the kind of more casual players can have that kind of upgrade to make losing less punitive. So yeah, you would go up here, you would jump in there, pop, go into the ship, and then I've been thinking about the flow of that. So you would jump into your flying kitchen, it will fly up into the air. You get your end of run scoreboard, which we had a kind of rough version of this before, but this needs to be completely rebuilt. This would tie into like a Steam scoreboard as well. So we'd have an actual kind of maybe a daily scoreboard and then a all-time one or something like that. And then you'd go into a screen which is effectively like the effectively like the upgrade screen in Vampire Survivors. Something very simple, just a couple of different levels of upgrade of a few different things, right? But this would be themed as being like the kitchen inside that ship. So we've got a kind of a diegetic menu where the little ship that you fly around in, you jump in it at the end of the level. Maybe the camera zooms into the window as you're flying off, and then you're in the ship and you buy these upgrades. And the way that I'm thinking the economy currently works is the upgrades all cost coins, and that's like the main thing you need, but you also need stars to unlock like the categories of upgrades. And that's how, you know, stars will be just the way that we generally track how much the player has progressed through the game. So that won't be a currency that you spend, it will just be like a tracking resource. So we know that like a player that has 100 stars is like been playing the game for a long time, and then we can also use that variable for other things, right? So from a player facing perspective, every customer they serve gives them a star, right? And that means that when they come into this menu, when they've got 30 stars, they'll have some new upgrades available that they can now see and purchase. And as they purchase them, this is going to get filled out with different stuff. Right, so there might be areas of the kitchen where it's like a broken cupboard and it's got all like spider webs in it and stuff. And then when you've got enough stars and you come back, you can click on that and it sort of pings into being a nice version. And then your little upgrades are there. That will be things like kitchen tools, or, you know, maybe the economy upgrades that give you like more money for doing things during a run are like a filing cabinet or something like that. Just to kind of make it feel kind of cozy, make it feel homely, make it feel like a real thing. And this is kind of probably something I would draw by hand on Procreate or something like that. I think that will work, and it will just be very easy to understand. Because again, I had a lot of these features, I had them in mind in the previous kind of version of the game, but then since we've been trying to retheme it towards narrowing it down to being more about the cooking, it's just made it much more obvious what the metaphor should be here. It's upgrading your kitchen, and your kitchen is this little flying thing, and then having the kitchen be like a flying ship going through this kind of crazy cosmic science fantasy world means that it makes sense that you keep going to a new place and having to start again, kind of thing. So yeah, every run is you basically building out the world in one place, serving as many of the customers there as you can, getting back on the ship, and then you fly into the sky, you spend your coins. If you've got way more stars than you did last time, you unlock some stuff. And then in the back end, we also can use the stars to basically, as a metric of the player's progress, right? So with our diners, I was going to call them customers, but I called them diners internally in the code just because it's quicker to write. With the diners, we've got, you know, I started drawing a bunch of them. These were just ones I drew on. I've got like a pixel art thing on the iPad, and I just sit there and like work them out. The only ones I've actually implemented so far are the beholder, the little barbarian guy, and this alien bean thing. And the way they work is the amount of coins they give you is determined by the type of food they got off of you. So like the food that's easy to get doesn't give you that many coins. And then they also have like bonuses that you can get during that run. So if, for example, if you collect loads of red cookbooks, then you get bonuses for all of the meat or animal based dishes you serve. And if you collect loads of green cookbooks, you get bonuses for the plant based dishes you serve. That's kind of the stuff that determines the gold payout. And then there will be upgrades that determine the gold payout as well. But I've also made it already so that some of these characters will have like a bonus thing they give you. So for example, like a key. Like you might have a blacksmith that makes keys, and when they give you your money, they also give you a key. The beholder currently gives you a ruby. It's just like easy to remember because he's a big red guy. And I think that's a neat little bonus because it means that when you're deeper into the game and you have a good memory for what who all of the customers are and what they do, you can deliberately like chain together their rewards, because you might have a customer that's like if there's a customer that's a cow, they might give you a bottle of milk as part of their payment, and then you might use that milk in another recipe, right? Some of them, if we had we've got these cookbooks you pick up that shuffle new rooms into your deck and give you other bonuses and stuff. If you serve a meal to a druid, they might give you a green cookbook as part of their bonus, right? So there'll be this like mini game of remembering what the different customers give you as additional rewards, and then like serving them in the right order so you get the rewards in the order that's like tactically beneficial to you during that run. How are you going to make always backtracking your way into the kitchen ship interesting? Yeah, it's a difficult one because that's kind of a fundamental challenge with Metroidvanias anyway, is that they're, it's a contiguous world, there's backtracking, and I mean some of it we've got some of that stuff in place already. So there are certain mechanics that kind of trigger based on how many rooms you've built. So for example, it's not a very prominent mechanic yet, but I am gonna like turn it up later on. We have these, what are they called? Are they just called flowers? I can't remember. Yeah, we have these objects that are flowers, and they spawn, and then every time you build a new room, they tick and they have a chance to grow. And the stuff they currently grow into are just very standard flowers that don't really do much. You can make perfume out of them and use them in certain recipes. They don't really do much, but what I intend to do is eventually make these into a bigger array of unusual things, like, Venus flytrap, maybe occasionally a flower has a bomb on, all of that kind of stuff. And that's an example of the sort of mechanic that we can use to address that kind of problem, where basically you build out away from the center of the level, and then as you come back, there are some things that have advanced or changed or moved on. I do think that the diners help with that issue in a way that the previous kind of design of the game didn't, because often you'll be building out, and then as you come back, you'll be bringing the food back to them as you pass back to the center. And then there are other things like the fungus that makes up the red rooms kind of grows, and that means that sometimes if you want to pass back through it, you have to like force a way through using bombs and fire and stuff. So it's definitely So yeah, what Supower said in the chat is like, it's definitely a design problem that the game has, and it's one that I'm aware of, but it's one that we've got a few features in place already to meet it, and I think it's just one of those things that I will kind of continue to design around as the game goes on. But it kind of becomes, it's part of the challenge of the game, really, of like, because you have to get back to the start, you have to be conscientious of how you build the level, because if you just build out in a massive line in one direction, your chance of like falling and dying on the way back goes way up. And we also have, we've got stuff like I put a kind of Zelda style falling leaf thing, like when you're carrying this you can drift down, and there's a balloon that lets you go up as well. So we've got a couple of different sort of emergency items that allow you to sort of teleport or move around in different ways, and a lot of them haven't been like super polished yet. They've just been thrown in to test, but yeah, I think when you're trying to make a game like this where there's a lot of possible emergence, that's kind of just the way you design it. You like create a new problem for the player, and then you create some solutions for the player, and then you create a new problem, and then you create some solutions, and then you try and occasionally like tie them all back in together and make sure that they're not just like useful in one situation. Dynadash but Metroidvania, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it is Dirt World, just rethemed. So we're messing around with names. Working title currently is Golem Gourmet, just because that's just very obvious that it's kind of a silly fantasy game about cooking, and it's got alliteration and stuff. But yeah, most of my work in the last month or so has been making all of this background art and everything. And the other thing is, once I started doing that, it started to make the game feel a little bit more whimsical. And even though it still has this kind of dark, sort of labyrinthy 80s dark fantasy thing, it does feel kind of whimsical, even though there's kind of slight horror elements in some places. So it just kind of feels like it's coming together a bit. I've had to, you know, it's a weird thing doing a big pivot like this, because you're just like, oh, this feels like too much change at once. But in terms of like looking at the idea compared to the old idea and thinking, does this help me make a game that has that is kind of coherent and where I can imagine what the full version of the game is? And it was just, yeah. Whereas the one I had before, I mean, the other problem was it was very dependent on players caring about the story between runs. And pretty much the only run-based game I know of where people do care about that is Hades. And in my mind, Hades only really works because, like, it's very cool to engage with these figures of myth who you've heard about before, and they're like cool, sexy versions of them. And that's kind of why Hades can get away with being like a run-based action game and having people care about talking to the characters. I don't think most sort of score-chasing run-based action games can make people care that much. You know, like something like Binding of Isaac, of course it has characters and lore, but it's not like you're not reading loads and loads of dialogue in that. It's just something you absorb pretty much. I think these arrows are broken. Yeah, the arrow hurts me when I stand next to it. That's a busted mechanic. Yeah. Cephsophatus, is it? Said, yeah, the rooms become supermarkets. I also put in these rooms, I put in a couple of rooms that were like much taller, so that it kind of forces the player up and down in the building space, and that kind of creates little puzzles of like, oh, how do I get back round there? So I created this massive green chasm room that is, you know, it's got quite a lot of good stuff in, but if you go all the way down, you're going to have a trouble kind of just jumping back up without building rooms up the side. And there's also a red room that's like a big scary red spire that I based on like the kind of towers in Oblivion kind of thing. Oh yeah, the other thing that I added is if you watch when a room gets built, there's a VFX where a kind of flash comes in that's the color of the room. And as that happens, all of the blocks that make up the room go to black. So it kind of inverts for a second, which is a nice visual effect. But the layer that the player character and the monsters and stuff on isn't affected by it. So if you build a room and there's a monster in there and it's a danger, you get the kind of cool VFX of the room being built that kind of calls out the color of the room. It goes green, red, blue, whatever. but it also doesn't like hide anything dangerous that you need to immediately recognize. So if I build this room and there's a monster in it, they'll be in the correct color, the background will be green, and the blocks will fade to black very briefly just to emphasize the flash. And I spent like a few hours messing around with that effect. I think it came out quite nice. So yeah, like the blocks look like they get silhouetted by the flash of the new room being built. This guy wants a carrot. Yeah. And those guys as well, from like a kind of content point of view, I was like, can I do these guys with just an idle animation? Right? And I thought maybe I might need to do them, like do some sort of celebration animation when they get what they want. But at the moment, it's just an idle animation and everything's programmatic. So when you go close to them and they're talking to you, their animation speeds up. They occasionally flip on their x-axis, so it looks like they're looking left and right around. And then when you feed them, they do some like bouncing up and down. Oh, that I squished their fruit. I was taking them a piece of fruit and I squished it. Yeah, if I give one of these guys something, you'll see they sort of just jump around. So they don't actually have a separate animation. It's very janky, but it's fine for now. But I thought, if we do go down this route, I'm going to have to make loads of these. So I really want them to just be like, they have a kind of characterful 4 or 5 frame idle animation. And then most of the appeal comes from like seeing what they want and seeing what they give you. Because they'll all have, well, most of them will have like some bonus thing they give you, and also the things that they eat will be determined by what customer you have, right? And then as we progress through the game and we have more stars, you know, when we've got 4 stars, we're going to only see the first batch of customers. When we've got 40 stars, it's going to like randomize between the easy ones and like the more difficult ones. And then when we've got 100 stars, we'll see the really rare ones, but they won't come up all the time because it'll be randomizing from the whole pool. And then we might get some weird ones. So we might get like, one of the ones I was thinking about was like a Godzilla that wants a barrel of toxic waste. And you have to carry a barrel of toxic waste to them and then they eat it, that kind of thing. Yeah, you can build over the rooms. And the challenge with that is I need to make certain rooms immune to being built over. So this starting area needs to... It has this thing in place where you can't build into the starting area. It's a bit janky at the moment. And the other thing that I haven't put in place yet is anything to sort of decide what happens when you take the floor away from under the diners. But I imagine if the diners get blocked by blocks or if they get attacked by a creature, I'm just going to have them go up in a puff of smoke and you kind of lose them. And then the game kind of tells you about it at the end of a run. They get a little cross over them kind of thing. But yeah, being able to build back over the rooms was one of those things that was a bug that turned into a feature. And people who've played this, they tend to initially find it a bit weird, and then once they understand it, they kind of realize that it's a big kind of strategic part of the game. Because when you've got a room like this is the mine that I'm in currently, which has basically a higher spawn rate for these golden ore blocks. You can like build another room over the mine, it will break all of the golden ore blocks and the treasure will fall into the room. And there's like lots of situations where you can do that in the game. And it wasn't an intentional thing, but it just ended up being a really fun thing to kind of play around. So that's why that kind of stayed that way. Even though people do find it a little bit unintuitive at the start, I think it really does become like a really fun mixing of the kind of spelunky part of the game with the drafting deck building part of the game. Because that's the thing. It's like, you know, loads of people are going to be making games that are using the room drafting from blueprints now because it was popular and it was cool and it was an interesting idea. But you do get something quite unique from using it with gravity, right? Because that's a game where you're drafting a map, kind of like looking down on it from the top like a board game, and then you're walking around in that space. But doing that in the context of a platformer, it's like the rooms that you draft have kind of gravity and they have like an up-down relationship to each other and stuff like that. So anything where it's like, oh, you can break the stuff in one room by building a room over it and then everything falls down, that's fun because we can do stuff like deliberately making all the treasure fall into another room and have a beneficial thing, or we can have stuff like this acid mechanic where you accidentally break a toxic barrel and then it eats through the level and then you have a difficult jump to kind of make it back to the start. And that's another thing, because like dying from losing your health from getting like hurt during the run the game isn't that difficult in that regard. The enemies and stuff that are currently in the game don't really try and kill you that hard. And I think I'm probably going to keep it that way, because I think the main big threat in a platformer should be falling off the platforms and falling down the hole. And because we've got all of these mechanics like bombs and acid and stuff, I think often like the more interesting threat is destroying the level so much that you can't make it back. So I'm trying to put the emphasis on that, because that ties together with the room building more. And yes, there are things like this annoying little turret that's going to shoot me and like monsters that attack me and stuff, but mostly they're kind of quite avoidable and they only really get you if you're bad or you're not paying attention. Like this ghost is really dumb. Yeah. This is my Oblivion Tower. And yeah, because the fungus blocks grow, you sometimes end up in a situation where they kind of block your route. I've temporarily made it so you can always whack them and destroy them, but they sort of spawn clouds of poison, and they'll occasionally spawn a little enemy like that who will pop out of the block, and he will explode. Randall, that is... the trapdoor game wasn't a deliberate inspiration, but it was definitely like one of the things. Like a few people have pointed that out. I guess a few people in our age group, and it definitely was like afterwards. I was like, oh yeah, yeah. It's like I can almost imagine a trailer for this game being in claymation. Yeah, Pepper. I'm trying to get into doing more YouTubery thumbnails, but the only way I can sort of mentally get myself to do it is if I kind of tell myself I'm doing a parody of them. I haven't been called cordial many times. Yeah, friends. So that's exactly the thing, and I think there's like a Games Crit channel that doesn't post as much anymore, but it's called Cool Ghosts. And they did a really good video on Wilmot's Warehouse before, which is like a game where you organize a warehouse and push blocks around and stuff. And one of the points that I think it was Quentin Smith made in that video was that humans are just generally like... we enjoy being frustrated by problems that we've caused ourselves in games. And that's a really kind of general game design principle. If you're making like a challenge-based game that's difficult, is that people want to feel like they failed because of their own lack of skill rather than because the game did something mean, right? And it's even like, you can even see this in like the FromSoft community when people talk about how they don't like Elden Ring because the bosses are too random, right? So it makes the game feel less fair, that kind of stuff. But I sort of, yeah, the kind of Wilmot's Warehouse example of that really made that stick in my head. And I think, yeah, you're right that that's kind of why I'm trying not to put too much emphasis on fighting the monsters or the monsters killing you. And one is because it's kind of hard to make that good. And I think, you know, when I kind of first came up with this idea, it was always going to be mainly about item manipulation and carrying items around, and then like using the room ordering to determine like which items you get and where you can take them to and all of that kind of stuff. So we always wanted to keep the emphasis on that and not too much on the fighting. But yeah, from just a broader game design perspective, it just makes sense for the failure in this game to be because you did something stupid. Like, I didn't need to kill that bug and make it drop acid on the floor, right? I didn't need to do that at all. That bug doesn't attack me. So now that I've done that, if I like ruin my run by melting an important part of the level, or like melting a treasure chest and losing the stuff inside of it, that to me now becomes funny rather than, I mean, it's frustrating, but it's funny because I kind of caused it and I go, oh, what am I like, right? Which I've been referring to those as Noita moments as they happen in the game, because this, you know, putting this acid mechanic in, for example, was just like trying to generate Noita moments. It's like, okay, that's kind of like Noita because you're doing like level destruction using the gravity and stuff like that. But it's also just that kind of like yeah, just creating those slapstick moments where the player has kind of caused their own ruination. I think that's kind of a fun thing to try and generate with a kind of a game that's very sort of procedural and has a lot of kind of emergent interlocked elements like that. So yeah, that's where I've been at, and there's a bunch of system stuff to work on to get all this in place, but I don't really have enough time to start on any of that today. I've been trying to draw a sprite for this ship to replace that green programmer art for a little while, and you know, I spent some time on that last night. I didn't quite get to where I want to with it, because I kind of want it to look like something that can zoom through the sky fast, but kind of also keep it a little bit sort of chibi looking. You think of like the vehicles in Advance Wars or something like that, where you've got these kind of chibi vehicles. So what I'm going to do now, I've got about an hour and a half till I need to do dad stuff. So I'm going to just kind of go through my backlog and mark off stuff that I've done. So we have a Trello, which is mainly for like bigger tasks that Gleb, the other programmer, is working on. And this is just where I dump every idea I have. And it's very, very helpful, because it means if I'm somewhere in a session and I know I should stop, but I've still got an idea, I can kind of dump it in here. And nothing on this list is kind of definitely approved, and I'm definitely making it. It's just a big repository of all of that. So I'm just going to go through and like check what things I've done that I haven't marked off yet. See, there's some stuff in here as well that's been superseded by the new diner thing. So I was thinking, oh, it would be good to have an enemy that's like a squid, flying squid thing, and when you whack it, some ink comes out, because we've got ink as a resource. But I might just have a diner that's a squid that gives you some ink. Asked a question about drawing on Android tablet, but it scrolled off. Let me just see. Randall. Yeah, sorry, I don't use an Android tablet, so I can't really recommend anything there. I think, you know, most apps have a free version, right? So you just got to try them out. And yeah, I use Procreate, which is iOS only, for drawing like messy art, I would call it. Some of the stuff in the game is drawn in Procreate, because we have this weird mix of pixel art and other styles, which kind of works, but it's mainly because the painterly stuff, I've taken screenshots of the pixel art and then like smudged it and painted it into higher res stuff, so it's still kind of using the same color palette and all of that. And then I use something called Resprite for sprite work, but again, most of them have a demo version, and I think really it comes down to less like what do other people recommend and more what do you find useful, because like, you know, people have told me before, don't use Resprite, use Sprite. The reason I like Resprite is I'm not really a pixel artist, and it has loads of really good like stippling shading modes in it that I use quite a lot. So if I want like a brickwork texture, it's just there, that kind of stuff. And I find it very, very helpful for the kind of slightly grungy, dark pixel art that we're using in the background. Most of the smaller objects, like the actual game tiles and these individual objects, I just draw in the GameMaker art tool, which I really, really like. Lots of people that have been using GameMaker for a long time don't like the new one, I've noticed, but I'm very much used to using it. And you can do cool stuff like these bonfire animations, and all of these fire animations, I did them by drawing onto the sprite while the animation was looping. You can like draw or erase while the animation is running, and it's really good for making these sort of wobbly, fluid animations. So a lot of that stuff, it's just kind of, you know, I have a different process for doing art for all different parts of the game, and that might sound kind of a bit kind of complex and all over the place, but I think it's how most people end up working, you know. Same as like if I draw something on the iPad and it ends up being a little bit too bright for the game, and the GameMaker editor doesn't have like full image color changing things, you can kind of change color by color, so that then I'll load it into GIMP and I'll do stuff there, and then I'll load it in here. It's just, there's lots of you know, build your own workflow bouncing around between stuff in games. What's your opinion on Hack and Plan? I don't know what it is. Don't know what it is. That's done. These are to do... what's the word for, like, this isn't relevant anymore? I'll just call it cancelled. So some of these are just like very like one piece of content ideas. Proximity mines, those exist now, although they don't spawn in many places. Acid splash bomb, that exists. The bug exists. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if I was doing Kanban with a team, I would be fine with Trello. Yeah, obsolete is better than cancelled, thank you. Obsolete. Obsolete. How long have I been working on this? About 9 months. Probably about 4 months of taking it seriously. 5 months of just like messing around, seeing if there's an idea there. But one of the things I tend to find that when I'm working on a project, I jump around between lots of different organizational methods. And that would be very frustrating on a larger team, but I just need to use what works. So for example, what I'm doing here, I wouldn't do this on Trello because everything you put on Trello takes up too much space. And if you have like a backlog with 100 things in and they're just like rough ideas that you might not even do, it's not helpful. So like if I was working with a larger team, what I would do is have a spreadsheet like this for like the ideas backlog for stuff that, you know, any idea anyone has ever had, and then stuff would only go onto Trello once we were actually deciding to do it in that sprint or, you know, in the next couple of sprints. Just to like, I like Trello, but I don't like the fact that every single thing you put on, I mean, you can put something in and put lists in it, like, you know, ideas for new enemies, and then it's got a sub list, but that buries it down a level, and then you can't kind of access the idea. And I really kind of just like having everything in a big long list like this. This is not good enough for like, you know, the details of a system, but a lot of the core systems of this game are in place now. And I think that's part of why I wanted to make a game like this. It's also from a production perspective, there's like an MVP version of this game where we can finish it, get it out, and then I can go back through this list and just keep adding, you know, food or monsters or different types of room and stuff, and like do updates after it's launched, because that's one of the benefits of making a procedural game. It's like you make the whole game and then you fill the middle with more and more stuff. You know, that's the kind of Minecraft kind of production, or sort of live ops, I guess you would call it, like post-launch adding stuff kind of methodology. Do I have a price in mind? Not sure. Probably like $12 or something like that. But that is really me just pulling numbers out of there. I think it comes down to, when we get to that stage, how much stuff have we put in for like replayability, like, you know, score tables, secrets, weird runs that you can do that are very based on a combination of skill and RNG that are like very hard to pull off. I think those are the sorts of things that would keep someone playing long enough for them to think it was like a high value game, I guess. But there are a lot of things to deal with before we get there. One of them that I'm quite worried about is optimization, because we already had quite a lot of people that couldn't play the alpha, even though we'd done optimizations on it. And it's not that we can't optimize it so that it works for people. It's that because it is a 2D game, people expect it to run on anything. So even if they've got like a 12-year-old laptop and we do as many optimizations as we possibly can, the people with the 12-year-old laptop will still think it's reasonable to expect it to run on their machine. And that's because people have generally got the idea that what a GPU does is render 3D graphics to make something that looks realistic. And that means if you have a very kind of artsy 2D game that's cartoony, but it's quite resource intensive, they can't understand why it's resource intensive. And I think that's a problem we're not ever going to get past with this game. And I think that means that even if we make the absolute best version of this game that we possibly can, and we optimize the hell out of it, it's probably still going to end up getting like review bombed by people that just think every 2D game should run on their potato. And I don't really know what to do about that, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. He does need to tap his foot when the character... I mean, that was a classic. Sonic the Hedgehog did that as well. Make bats lay eggs. That happens now. Rune block. Don't even know what that is. Carrot monster. Milk machine. Item burn destruction should be more obvious. I think that's obsolete because I made it so that fewer items actually burn. Where did that go? What was the hardest design challenge you faced with this game? I mean, I think it's stuff like the pivot we've been talking about today, because it's when there's like a big area of the game that you're like not thinking about because you don't want to think about it because it just has too many unresolved things in. That's the kind of problem. I think most of the other problems in the game, it's just like I can see what would be a solve for this. I think a lot of it really comes down to just being willing to put the work in to try something out, even if you're going to throw it away. Because like, I think a lot of the discourse around game dev that we get on here and on, you know, other places comes from people that don't actually enjoy doing the work. And obviously you should try and be efficient and not waste time and all of that kind of stuff. And I understand if you're like, if you're quitting your job to become a full-time game developer, which I haven't done, and I don't think most other people should do, you know, unless your current job is making games and you've already made a hobby project that you think is a product, I don't think anyone should like quit their job to become a game developer. But if you're in that situation, I can understand the kind of, you know, the kind of stuff that you see like Aramis and Thornity talk about, for example, of like, we're going to spend this many hours on this game, and that means we need to limit the scope to what we can do in this many hours and then release it. All of that kind of stuff. Like, I think that's valid if that's your main job. I think most of the time, though, the reason why people get so obsessed with scope and like designing in this very smart way and like trying not to make things that they don't need to make and all of that kind of stuff is because they're just very slow at doing the work of implementation, right? And maybe it's not them that's very slow, but like people in general who haven't been doing this for 5-10 years or whatever, they have like an aversion to just building something and trying it and seeing how it feels because they don't want to like quote unquote waste time. But because what we're doing is experiential, like game design is a second order problem, which basically means that you cannot solve it in your head. You have to build the thing and then interact with it or have someone else interact with it. And there's not really any way around that. And like, the only way around that is getting faster at the implementation or hiring someone that's faster at the implementation, which I've done in some areas of this game, like the stuff that I can't do, someone else is doing them, so that you can iterate faster and so that you can try things out faster. Because not everything that you have the idea to put in your game is going to be good. So it's weird. It's like, obviously there are design problems, but I don't necessarily think of them that way because it's just like, okay, here's something that we need to solve, and solving it is going to be like messing around with some fun stuff over here. I mean, there's very few things in this game to work on that I don't find fun, and like the ones that I really don't find fun are things like UI and like data architecture, and Gleb is doing all of that, so I'm very lucky to have that. And I know not everyone has that, but also, you know, I keep saying you're your boss of your own projects. If there's stuff you really don't like doing, no one is making you make a game with those elements in, right? Yeah, we do get paranoid about scope for that reason, and I think it's valid as well because like sometimes the game dictates the scope. I think sometimes people think they can just go, oh, I want to release this game in 6 months, so that will determine the scope. And it's like, the scope is kind of determined by the genre, you know? Like, if you're making a game where the thing that people are going to compare it to is Slay the Spire, then your game needs to have the same amount of content variety as Slay the Spire. Otherwise, it kind of feels a bit not worth doing because people are always going to make that comparison. So that's an example of like, and I think this is why, you know, when you see Chris Zukowski talk about like marketing starts with the thing you choose to make, and a lot of the kind of conclusion that Chris usually ends up drawing from that is like, here are the games that do well because those are the games that are easy for devs to make, so that's what you should make, right? And I don't necessarily see it that way. It's more like, if you commit to a certain type of game, then you need to be like honest with yourself about what people who play that type of game want, and that is going to be what determines your scope, right? That's one of the reasons why in this game, I just recently went back and like redid all of the animations and stuff, because they didn't feel cool. It didn't feel cool to make the character run around and jump and stuff. And I know that people that play a sort of skill-based platformer will care about that. So it's just being honest. And I think that's really where the overlap between like caring about what the audience or the market wants and being more developer-centric and thinking about your own time and your own like practice and what you're comfortable doing and not doing. That's really where the overlap is. It's like being honest that if you're making X type of game, then you do need to invest the time in, you know, making this type of content or making it look good in this type of way, or, you know, whatever it is. Like the genre determines like what you need to care about as a developer as you're working on that thing. So yeah. Yeah, Zero, I think there's both of those extremes. But I think that's also fine if you're a hobbyist. You know, if you're doing it for the fun of doing it and for like making something you want to make, you can make the most ridiculous, ambitious thing and spend as long as you want doing it. But I think it was actually Code Monkey put out a newsletter a few weeks about that. It was like, he made a really good point that was like, you know, if you go on Reddit and you see everyone's failure stories and stuff like that on Game Dev Reddit, a lot of it is because people haven't been honest with themselves about their aspirations. So they secretly have the aspiration of being a successful commercial game developer, but they've approached what they're doing as a hobby, and then like at the end they've gone, oh, let's sell this now, and they've kind of pivoted, and it hasn't worked because they haven't approached it that way from the beginning, right? And it's totally fine. You know, I've been a hobbyist game developer for a very long time. I've been making games, if you can call them that, since I was like 8 or 9. So for me, like the transition from just doing it as a fun hobby activity into something where I'm like, maybe someone else would want to play this, has been really late in my life compared to some other people. But yeah, you get the people that work on one thing for ages and make it too big, and it's the problem with the scope is often just that it leads to like all of the elements of the game being very low quality, which is kind of why I'm doing this pivot in my game at the moment, just like tightening up the scope, focusing it more on the like joy of collecting lots of treasure and like serving the customers, seeing all the different customers. It's like narrowing down the scope, but thinking about scope less as like just how much work is there. Like just not thinking about it purely as like how much work is there in the game, and thinking of it more in terms of focus, of like how focused is the game, and if the game is more focused on a particular player experience, right, which is where the visual element of like the metaphor of scope comes from. When we talk about scope on a project, it's like what is inside the scope and what's outside the scope. It's a visual metaphor, like a telescope looking at a thing, what's inside, what's outside. If you use that idea of like scope as focus, then it becomes less about just like, oh, how much work do I want to do on this game before I release it, and more about, if I focus the experience in this way, how does that increase or reduce like the value to the player of these things I'm doing, right? And like example from this week, was it this week? No, last Thursday I played Relic Abyss, which I thought was a very, very good game. Like I followed the developer on Blue Sky. I think that's a really beautifully crafted game, but it was like a very kind of glossy Vampire Survivors thing with all animated characters and stuff, and it had all of this story in, and to me that was like, this is a feature that is outside the scope of what people usually care about in this type of game. So that's an example of where in my mind, like the scope of the game is just like, what do people usually want from this type of experience? And anything that you intend to add value needs to still be within the scope of like what people care about in that type of game. And I think sometimes you can be like, you know, it kind of made me really come around to this idea of changing my own game, was I had so much that was riding on this external story about what happens between runs. And I just realized that most people that want to run around and blow stuff up and collect coins don't also want, probably aren't going to get that much value from that kind of story. So I always think about scoping not just from like a project manager point of view of like how much work is there to do, but also from like a player facing game design point of view of when we decide what to include or exclude from the game, what's the kind of return on our time investment in terms of how much enjoyableness it adds, or whatever you want to call it. And I think, you know, that way of thinking about scope as well is like one of the things you need to do when you kind of cross over into sort of taking what you're doing seriously and like making games for other people rather than just as a hobby activity for yourself. Yeah, with students, so we did when I used to run a degree, we had like a 3rd year final major project, and one of the things we do in that was when people got their groups together, we would spend a week just, the team had to get to know each other and what they'd done before. Thank you, Facewall. I should probably do a video on it again soon, because I that's kind of a metaphor I use quite frequently. Like, think about scope as a looking device, right? That's why it's called scope. It's not size, it's what's in focus, what's out of focus. Like, what are we focused on? Like, the example I give, because it's quite easy to memorize as a mnemonic, is if you think about a telescope, right? And you're going to make a game about pirates. You've decided you're making a pirate game. You go to Pirate Island, and Pirate Island has all of the pirate tropes on it. And when you look at it with your telescope and you're zoomed out, you can see everything on Pirate Island. You can see, you know, galleons fighting. You can see someone digging for treasure on the beach. You can see people drinking grog and singing shanties. But you can see all of those things very small because you're zoomed out. So nothing is in a lot of detail. But then you could also zoom right in and you could see just someone digging for treasure. And you can see like the tools that they use. Or you can zoom just on the sea shanties and you can see like the different things that they're drinking, right? And that's kind of what scope is to me. Like, if you choose a theme for your game or you choose a genre for your game, you can have like a broad, shallow experience where you have everything you could think of, but it's not done to a high level of detail. Or you can zoom in on something and you can say, okay, in this fantasy game, you're just running a shop. Or in this fantasy game, you only play as a wizard and you don't get to pick the other classes. That to me is like a good way of understanding scope. Because if you think of, like, the pirate example is a good one. If you think of Sea of Thieves as a game, that is a very high production values, high cost game. And it does have all of the parts of the pirate fantasy in. Everything you could think of as part of a pirate fantasy is in Sea of Thieves. If you go to, like, Sid Meier's Pirates, that has lots of mini games in it, but that's a big commercial game. If you go to, I don't know, Monkey Island, slightly smaller production, how do they handle it? Well, you don't actually do sword fighting in Monkey Island. You have a argument with someone via the text system, and that's got the animation of the sword fighting happening at the same time. And it's very funny, because it's kind of becomes this mechanical slapstick thing of, like, how do we do a sword fight using the dialogue system? And that's kind of like, yeah, another way of thinking about scope. It's like, which of the things do we include and exclude, and like, how do they fit within the game kind of thing? Yeah. I mean, yeah, they say just keep the game small, and then often, like, the way that people interpret that is, okay, I'm just gonna make the AAA game that I want, but only make one level of it, right? Which is, I did a video back in December that was about indie game genres and why we have these specifically indie game genres, like OS simulators or, you know, factory games and stuff like that. And it was all about this. It was basically like, the scope of an indie game isn't just, I'm going to make one of these games that Ubisoft would make and put less content in it. That's not how you make a small game. How you make a small game is by, like, actually changing the design so that you're working smarter. You know, like, the example I use often is, like, if you play Dredge or Pacific Drive, those are games where the vehicle is the character And although you might interact with other characters over a radio or like little portraits that pop up when you go into town, there's no like people walking around or like physical 3D characters you can interact with. And that's a very smart way of reducing the scope while still kind of keeping the story the same of like what you're doing in that game. Yeah, a lot of people just like make small games, and then it's like, I think because a lot of the people who are either having those discussions or giving that advice out don't really play a lot of indie games. They don't really extend that to explain like what is a good small game for an indie developer to make. And that's kind of one of the reasons why, if you look at the tagline of this channel, it's like, it's not, hey, I'm a game developer and I'm here to teach you about games. It's not like, the tagline of this channel, I think currently, is this is a variety channel about indie games and how they're made, right? And for me, that's very important, because I think one of the things that determines your success as an indie game developer is people talk about it as like understanding the market, and that makes it sound very clinical and professional. But really, if you actually like and play indie games and your ideas about your own indie games are like kicking off from those ideas, then you already have a head start, because you know that those games have a market, right? If you've played some of the things that, like, I don't know, other people might look at and say, who would buy that? And they clearly have a massive market, like games like Unpacking or A Little to the Left, where they're just like beautiful games about moving simple objects around. If you don't engage with what's out there, you don't have an idea of what people actually like and would buy. And I think there are a lot of game dev channels or discussion areas where they treat it like indie game dev is just whatever game you want to make and you've made it independently, people like, because I think indie games are like a specific cultural form and people go and play them because they're different from AAA games. They're different from casual mobile games. And if you aren't engaging with it as like someone that likes that sort of thing, if you're engaging with it primarily as like a crafts person and you don't really care what other people have made or what they're making, and you're just sort of like cobbling your own game ideas together from like AAA and casual mobile games you've played, you're always going to be at a disadvantage. Yeah, maybe we need to do the scope video as like a proper video. I might dress up as a pirate. That would be a good idea. Let's see what else we've got on this list. Spawn more cauldrons. That's done. Oh, this is very satisfying. Fix food order list. That's done. Add shelving item. Oh, that's what we're going to do now, because I don't have loads of time before my son gets back from school. So we're going to do that now because that's easy. Create generic resource spawner for per room type items. That's done. Add barrels to spawners. We can do that now. Spawn more cauldrons and campfires. We've got cauldron spawning. That will do for now. Make roasting meat not instance. That needs doing, but that's going to take a bit more time. Make diners spawn in other rooms. That is done. That should be done. Decorate starting area. That's in progress. Yeah, I need to watch the Rami Ismail talk about mechanics versus content. That seems like it's like an evergreen thing. I think the other thing about understanding scope as well is like understanding how the value that people get from a game being big or small in different ways relates to the sort of game it is and what they're getting out of that sort of game, right? So I'm playing a game currently because it came up on PS Plus called Season, where you are in a strange sort of similar to our own world. You're in this like kind of cloistered community and you have to go out from it with your bike and a camera. You're taking photos of things and recording sounds and putting together a scrapbook. It's like, it's not a skill-based game at all. It's a story-based game, but it uses all of these image and sound collection mechanics to sort of gradually unfold the story. So instead of like talking to loads of characters, you're taking a photo of something and then your character comments on it, and then you put it in your scrapbook, and there's this like satisfying thing of arranging the scrapbook. That is the sort of game where the value comes from like how many things are there in the game that like reveal something about the world or like allow you to do a satisfying little interaction in your scrapbook. And it wouldn't be improved by like, I don't know, adding a challenge mode or something like that. And I think it's kind of like coming back to that idea earlier of putting a story in a game where it doesn't add value, you know, like when you're thinking about how big your game needs to be, it's really kind of what type of thing. Like I guess a better example is if you look at these kind of sort of speed run kind of games, like challenge speed run games, like Blood Thief. That is a game where it is about mastery, right? So you need quite a lot of depth and replayability so that the player can like, you know, play through a few levels and then go back to previous levels and complete them at a higher level of skill. And that type of scope in that game is very important because it's tied into the mastery that the game is about, and it's tied into the mastery that people would come to that sort of game in order to like experience and enjoy. And I think that's like a big game design skill, is understanding like, why would people play this game? And that is about their kind of motivations as a player, right? And so people have like diverse motivations. They might play one game to experience the story, and another game to experience like challenge, and another game because, you know, whatever. And that, but like, if you have a good idea that like my primary audience is mainly here for this thing, maybe there's a secondary audience who likes this thing, then like your sense of where the value comes from when you add loads of levels or you add loads of unlockable weapons or whatever, the more stuff you throw in the game, it becomes easier to judge whether it's worth doing because you understand who it helps, you know? Or kind of who it is kind of catering to in terms of player motivations. Okay, we're going to add a shelving item for library and chest positions, which I think I have a, let's see, vending machine. Let's base it on this. So I've got these books that you can pick up that do a little bit of the in-game deck building. So you pick up a green book, you get a green room, that kind of thing. So we're going to make a bookcase object that instead of like leaving the books on the floor, the bookcase, you'll smash it and a book will come out. So it's kind of like adding a little bit more interactivity and making the level a little bit less messy, because you don't just open the library and there's loads of these hovering books all over the place. So I've been meaning to do this for a little while. So I'll just do this now because I think this will only take a minute. Like, drawing the sprite is going to take the most time. Maybe we don't even need to randomize this. Let's just do it that way for now. I'm not going to have coins in. Okay. And it will be the same shape as this, which just makes it a little bit easier to kind of work out where they go in the level. Yep. So this is the code that makes a bunch of like wooden splinter debris. I need to change that because at the moment it's got glass and stuff in it. So furniture debris. Let's see what else we've got. Maybe we just do those. Don't need to randomize that. That will just kind of create a bunch of little wooden splinters when you smash the object. And I have this kind of special type of object called a debris, which is a It's like a physics object. It's kind of halfway between a particle and a standard physics object. This will be one of the things that we limit in terms of like doing optimization for like lower spec machines. Maybe we only allow fewer of these to exist at once. But yeah, the debris, it kind of creates those. They fly around and they fade. So you get the impression when like a block explodes that all of these little bits of rubble have kind of bounced around in the environment, but they disappear very quickly so that you don't get kind of confused and think that they're things you can interact with. And then, oh, I've just done a classic thing that I do very, very often. I'm always doing that. I overwrote the wrong one. Here we go. No, that's the vending machine. Hang on. Okay, that's it. This happens quite a lot. Sort of making copy an object and then overwrite the wrong one. Okay, so that's our... That's the vending machine. So that should do all of this kind of glass and stuff. Okay, I've got the wrong item spawning, so we'll swap those round. There we go. And then that stuff. Right, so vending machine spawns food items. We've lost that now. I'll fix that in a minute. There we go. Okay. What a pain in the butt. So these vending machines are like, they only appear later in the game when you get the blue rooms that are kind of like futuristic sci-fi rooms. And you can bomb them and then you get like meals and stuff out of them. So we're basing the bookcase on one of those. And these can be blown up with bombs, but we also just want them to be punchable. So we're going to do a collision with a combat system hurter. There we go. So when a hurter is literally just like a hurt box that anything can generate. So this isn't going to care whether the player has punched it or whether like something else has happened that's supposed to cause damage in the area. It will destroy the bookcase. And then what I will do is just... why do we have two... Why do we do that? I don't know why I did that. I think maybe I just did that to darken it to make it not stand out too much. Okay, just double check that I'm actually working on the bookcase and I don't do what I just did again and mess things up. That's fine. And then I want the grid up with... Let's do it to 8. There we go. Just really rough it out first. Let's make it quite chunky. So I'll just copy that. So the library room in this game is where you go to get to basically modify the deck of rooms that you can draft during that run. Because if you pick up different color books, it adds different types of rooms to your deck. And then later in the game, you can pick up these blue floppy disks that add the blue rooms to your deck as well, which is like a kind of advanced thing. That looks a bit wrong. I don't know what's going on. Maybe we need... Maybe what I need to do is fill in the top and the bottom so they're kind of their own thing. And then if we go there, 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 and there, that's giving us... I know what I'll do. So much of this kind of art stuff is just like measuring things. There we go. Sorry if anyone doesn't appreciate my weird psychedelic funk music that's playing, but I refuse to be another lo-fi hip-hop guy. I don't even dislike lo-fi hip-hop, I just dislike that it's become like the standard corporate backing music for all videos and streamers. And I'd just like to be different for the sake of it. Because, hey. Hey, we're an art and design channel. That's better. That looks more like what it is. Haven't left enough space for an outline. I'm going to cheat. Anchor it there. Add 2 pixels and add 1 pixel above. And we will just make sure that the collision mask doesn't actually go out that far. So, oh, no, not 9 slice. No. There we go. Manual. Just because I know that it will get broken too easily if we do that. So now I can put a outline around it, but not actually have that outline be part of the collision. So we'll just do that now. And I will put them in the game and test them while they look like this. And that just lets me get a feel for like the size of them and how they behave before I put loads of detail on the art. And this is why I like being able to do everything in one app, because I can just like jump between doing the placeholder art, testing it for like metrics like size and stuff, and then just immediately detailing it to a kind of that's good enough kind of level. And what I will do before we load that in is just make a couple of different sort of tone varieties. This one should be a bit more grayed out, or almost like purpley, because that's right. And then what I will do is make sure that's not animating, and then pick a random one of those frames. So image index equals irandom. Image number -1, and that means that each one that spawns will use a different frame, and then I can kind of test which of those base colors works the most before putting them anywhere else. So if we go to the library room, what I can do is I can put some in here, and I'm going to change the layout of this room. I don't like the layout of this room. It doesn't look anything like a library for a start. But what I'm going to do is initially put them in here. Maybe it will feel a bit more like a library just from putting these in, but we'll find out. Oh. How do I move that cobweb? There we go. Cobweb. Move. How do I... where's the annoying room bounds that I keep clicking on? Where are you? Okay. Okay, turn that back on, go back to the solid layer, get these bookcases. So because it's the library, we want these to sort of always spawn or always have a chance of spawning. So I'm going to put them in manually like that. But then also we've got these purple spots where a chest can spawn. And I'm going to add them to the random spawner for the chest. And that means that any grey room that has a chest spawner in, it will have a chance to turn it into one of these bookcases. So they're kind of like the little curios that you get in Darkest Dungeon that can be like just random little beneficial things. We'll make it so that they can basically spawn in any castle room, but the whole purpose of the library is, you know that there's going to be these things there. So we're going to have that kind of mix of like you build the library when you know you want the bookcases, and also you just randomly encounter bookcases through the game as well. So if I go to, let's go to my spawners. So this purple one with the golden chest on is called a bonus block spawner. And this can spawn, I mean, it mostly spawns objects that you can't pick up. So the item spawner that's a carrot, that will spawn items that you can pick up. The bonus block spawner will spawn like environmental blocks that are, helpful usually, but that are either a solid block that you need to blow up, like a chest or a safe or something like that, but also things like what we're building right now. And that means that you have rooms that have the same layout every time you build them, but they have different stuff in. So it's like a little bit of a randomization of the internals of the room. So things like these traps will, you know, spawn differently each time. These monster markers, the pink ones, will spawn differently each time. I think that one is going to cause problems because it's in the ground. I'm going to fix that now while we're here. It will be on the hidden preview layer. No, it's not. It should be on the hidden preview layer. Where's that one? There we go. What I really need to do is put that room bounds thing on its own layer so I don't keep accidentally clicking on it. There we go. Well, that's how kind of level design works in this game. We have a card. We have like a room that's like a card that you can kind of collect. And then when you lay it down in the actual level, this is using Gleb's room. So Gleb, the other person that's working on this game with me, built the library that allows us to have this room and then load it into the other room during the game. But yeah, all of these kind of spawners that you see will sort of randomize what they create. And it means that as I work through the game, we can, you know, open the bonus block spawner and we can change its list of things that it can spawn depending on which room it's in. And yeah, in the gray rooms, we can say, okay, now this has a chance to be a bookcase. Right, and obviously this is just, the randomness here isn't very well thought out. It's just, this is a list of things it can be. Each one has a chance of one because we're just making a list and picking from the list. That's the sort of stuff I might commit to data later on, but to be honest, I mean, after reading Derek Yu's Spelunky book and seeing that all of the kind of spawn rates and random chance in that was just tweaking and playing rather than doing anything sort of complicated or data driven, I think this is probably going to be fine. Gleb, the reason I'm manually placing them is for like the more unusual shaped rooms that have like don't actually use the so I think the main one where I really needed to do them that way was this kind of thing. This kind of thing, because I don't really want this to be registered as part of the room, because that should probably leave other rooms alone because it doesn't really look like it's part of the room. But yeah, I mean, if we can come up with a better way of doing it later on, then great. Let's see if these appear where they should and work. There we go. Library, we got it straight away. Okay, they need to be a lot darker than any of those, but let me just see what that crash is. I think I know what it is. Spawning the books and stuff. This is getting a bit... Why have we gone into country? We're going to go to dub now. We're going to go into dub reggae territory again because that's fun. Okay, so spawn container contents takes the H speed and the horizontal and vertical speed of the container and tries to transfer it to the objects that are spawned. And all that really means is that we need to make sure that this has a speed variable even if we're not going to use it. Maybe I should fix that in the function, the spawn container contents function, but why am I always doing that? We need like a most frequent typo counter. I'm always turning speed into puzzed. What's the other thing on the list that looked like it was going to be an easy one to do? So add shelving, add barrels to spawners. Oh yeah, that would be very quick. I might as well do that now before I forget as well. Random grey rooms. There's one. Oh, it spawned up there. Why is it doing that? Is that because the... The floating library. Yeah, that's a good shout, Gleb. Good shout. Why are they hovering? So let's just check where the... How does this work? So the... that's why. Okay, I'll fix that at the level of the... Okay, it's probably better to keep it in the middle of the bottom block because otherwise certain things will spawn into the floor. So we'll do that. We'll go... what's that? Take away 5 is 44. And then take away... no, that's not right. We want to take away 12. So 37. But we've got an extra pixel on the top. So 38? No, 36. Now the ones in the library that are going to need to be manually moved, which is annoying, but that will be the only place in the game where they're manually placed. Like they'll have a random chance to appear anywhere, but the library will be where you kind of spawn them deliberately, I guess. There we go. Right, that's spawning in the right place now. It just needs to look like it's got books on it. It needs to be darker. And we need to check that it actually breaks and spawns a book. One of the problems that I frequently have with things breaking and spawning other things is that I haven't put a safeguard in place to stop the things being like immediately destroyed as soon as they're spawned. So we'll have to check whether that happens. Yeah, in the library, they're a little bit sunk into the ground. Let's check if they break. They do break. They spawn books. The books don't get immediately destroyed for some strange reason. Right, and that makes... I mean, that both stops the room looking messy, because before when you came in and there were loads of these books, they're kind of hovering around and it just looked really messy. But also, there's just something very funny about smashing a bookcase open so you can read the book inside. I like that. That's silly. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to fix those ones in the library and then start working on the sprite. And I think if I can get them all selected at once, I can just move them up at the same time off the grid. Turn the snap off. There we go. Yeah, the foods in the hub are like a very... they can go away on the build menu as well, or they can move somewhere else, so just hacked them in very quickly. They're more just testing like what the thought process is when you have that information as a player, you know? That's why I sort of do the hacky version first. It's not because I'm like really want to get the feature into the game, so I'm gonna do it like in a bad way. It's because I need to test like the thought process that it produces when you as a player kind of have that piece of information, you know? Will people think to punch bookcases? Maybe not at first, but that's fine. That's fine. I feel like these need to be slightly bigger, so let's try it with 1 more pixel per shelf, because otherwise the books are going to be like, they're not even going to read as tall rectangles, which we probably need for them to look like books. Let's try that. Yeah, Gleb, took me a while to find the stars panel, but yeah, the where to do that, but I got there in the end. The biggest challenge with finding that was just that it's like, you know, it's not a code searchable thing, is it? It's like something that exists in those UI scenes, which aren't kind of something you can control F. If someone does multiple runs and it takes them a long time to work out you can punch bookcases, then I'm fine with that, because it will just be a fun aha moment for them when it happens. And it won't be the only way of getting books. You can get books out of crates and stuff as well. So I'm kind of fine with that. Part of the reason of it, you know, part of the thing of it being a game where there's so much sort of accidental destruction with bombs and stuff is, you know, if there's something that you need to destroy that you need to learn that you can destroy, then there's plenty of opportunity to sort of stumble on that by accident as well. The suggestion that some of these could be green or red without it looking like it's kind of promising you a particular thing. So we'll just make them very like faint colors. And then copy that a few times and flip it. Flip it up the other way as well. And then I'll just go through and change some of these colors. Maybe we go through with a brown. Like a purple, and just pick some of the bits where the pattern is too patterny. I'll try and eliminate the color pattern, and then I'll get like a different green. It's a bit too bright. Anything that's like a background object that the player can run past, I try and sort of make it very dingy looking. Because otherwise it looks like it's a solid thing you should bump into. That's like a constant thing that I'm fighting with in the kind of visual design part of this game. So just making it very, very clear what is actually collidable. So there's a few things like this where that you can smash them, but they're sort of in the background at the same time. Yeah, we've got to punch that bookcase. Just asking for it. I mean, it kind of plays into the humor of the main character just being this kind of big, strong himbo chef, you know? It's just something very amusing about, like, I'm going to punch a shelf to get a cookbook out of it so I can read the cookbook so that I can be temporarily better at making this type of food so that I can make more money. I think that's quite amusing. Let's just ramp up the shadows in the places where they should sort of be a bit more dense. We probably don't really want that many shelves in the library and for them to all drop books, but also we can mess around with that later on. What I care about at this stage is just getting that piece of content in so that I know there's now like a you know, playing it and trying to like put myself in the shoes of a player. I'll be able to sort of like play it more with the kind of strategic thinking that a player would have when they actually are like, why would I build a library, you know? That's what I care about. It might be that they, you know, eventually need to have other things in them, like just random coins and stuff. Cool. Yeah, I'll have a play around with the camera anchors later on. I sort of mainly intending to try them on doors as you kind of approach doors, and then the diners as well, so that the diner interactions feel a bit more kind of important and meaningful. Hello. So yeah, there's no interaction between the kind of combat and the diners yet. They should kind of get scared and run away maybe when they get attacked that way. Where's my punchable bookcase? See guys, this is what placeholder art should look like. This ship. When people say they're using AI for their placeholder art, if it looks too good, it's not placeholder art. That's there for me to work out how big to draw that sprite, and to just check whether having it there and having it move up and down works, and then I can kind of go from there in terms of like drawing that sprite and deciding what it looks like. I think people think placeholder art is like something that looks good for now, and it's like, no, it needs to be something that looks bad. It's there to help you work out like the specifications of the actual piece of art. Library. Yeah, the stained glass is cool. I want to eventually maybe there could be a puzzle on the stained glass windows like there is in Blueprints, or like some piece of lore or something. At the moment, it's just like kind of funny cookery related fantasy stuff like this fancy fork. Kind of almost want to make them one shade darker still, these bookcases. Yeah, I mean, if you're... Yeah, that's the thing. If your placeholder looks too nice, people are going to think that it's the intended thing. And that's really bad if your placeholder looks too nice, but also kind of looks bad. Because then people don't want to comment on it. Because they think it's final art. And they're like, I want to say that looks bad, but it looks like you spent a lot of time on it. Well, yeah, I mean, highly polished, almost good enough for release placeholders. But then that's not placeholder, is it? It's like us iterating on the art style, and like that's kind of how I work on this. Like I make something to like the best of my ability at the time, and then I'm like, okay, I'll probably come back and make that better later, like I did with the character sprite in this, right? You can still see like this sprite, for example, when I do the upward punch, is the old one. I haven't replaced them all. The looking up and down sprite haven't been replaced yet. They're still the old one. That's just working iteratively as well. It's not getting something in place so that you can answer other kind of questions about like the asset pipeline or something. Ah, there's a bomb hiding behind that. There was a bomb hiding behind the barrel that was already lit. I don't know how that happened, but that was kind of fun. This is a strange place for someone to leave their bookcase. I wonder if I can kite this projectile into it. You found a red cookbook. A random red room has been shuffled into your deck. During this run, you'll receive larger tips for animal-based dishes. So there's going to be a sprite here that is like a big magical cookbook. And now that I sort of understand what these books are a little bit, and that they are cookbooks and not just books, maybe it will have like, you know, like magical mushrooms and meat and stuff flying out of it. I don't know. So any of these guys, he wants, this is one of the things I need to update soon. I need to make it so that roasting meat doesn't happen instantaneously like that, because you can just jump into a torch holding a piece of meat and it will cook it straight away. So this guy will give me a tip now. You can see these little kind of coins that have a little platinum middle bit. Those are the coins that show you the tip you got from something. I just thought it helps make it clearer when you're getting a bonus. I'm not sure it's the best way of doing it. I might give them like a glow or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, now you have like an extra reason for collecting the books. Because they... And that also means that you might deliberately put off serving the customers because you want to collect books first so that you can get more money for each one. Which is kind of neat. I like that. Saw that goat fall down the side. I just cooked that meat by walking past a lit bomb with it. It's just the meat is very sensitive. It just immediately cooks. Yeah, there's some weird stuff going on with like getting hurt by jumping in front of him. So sometimes there's like an invisible hurt thing that I'm jumping into and I'm getting hurt in certain places in the game. That's a bug that I seem to have introduced in the last couple of weeks. I've noticed it happening in a few places, like the arrow traps. When the arrow is just laying on the ground, it still hurts you and stuff like that. And I'm not sure what I did to mess that up, but I think it's a kind of system that needs a whole big rewrite. That was fun. I think there's a poison gas cloud there which is gone, and it's left, and it still hurts me when I go in that area, yeah. There's a few things like that that I need to fix at some point. Something very amusing about like, oh, I've got a customer that wants a mushroom risotto. I know, I'll open this kind of fungal hell dimension to go and get some mushrooms to make this mushroom risotto. I find that amusing. It's kind of like if you've watched Dungeon Meshi, it kind of starts off quite gentle. Like the first sort of 5 or 6 episodes of Dungeon Meshi, it's just kind of what you would expect. It's like, oh, you know, we're going to eat a little guy that's a mushroom. We're going to eat a screaming mandrake root. And they're just like cooking very standard fantasy things. And then at some point it just goes completely off the rails and becomes really sort of a little bit body horror and a little like, it's that thing. I watched it with my kids and it wasn't too bad, but it's just that you get that with certain anime series where it's just like the age certification clearly needs to sort of ramp up halfway through because it just gets way more kind of edgy and dark than you were expecting it to, and they don't really signpost it. But I think there's a bit of that here. It's kind of funny to be like, oh, this guy wants a mushroom. I'll go into the scary, horrible Junji Ito dimension, I will travel there by teleporting down the toilet. Cool. Okay. Well, we've got our book spawners now, and that solves a couple of things. It means we've got more ways of getting books. Add shelving item for library and chest positions, done. Barrels to spawners, I think that's already done. I noticed they were spawning everywhere. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to do for today. What happened to the wizard? So the wizard is in the backstory now. So the idea is, you know, again, this is me trying to like refit the game around what people will expect from this type of game to some degree. Still keep some of my weird zaniness in it, but you know, it's a score chasing run based game, so people are mainly there to just kind of do the skill based thing that they want to do and make a big amount of coins, right? So this whole scene is going. It's just in the game because it's in the game currently. But the idea is like after each run, you go back in your little ship, you fly somewhere else, the game scores you, you go into your little kitchen on the ship, you upgrade your stuff, you upgrade your big hammer of Thor, giant wooden spoon, all of that kind of stuff. You do your little financial upgrades that make your food worth more, all of that kind of stuff. And then you start the next run and you come down into a new one of these docks. Maybe this dock will be different each time. I can like make different versions of this space that you start in. And then you do your run and then you jump back in. But we might have like a little post box. You occasionally get some mail in and you go and read it and it's like your old boss being like, hey, why did you run off with my magical amulet? Why did you run off with my magical cosmic spaceship? All of that kind of stuff. So that kind of backstory about being the downtrodden servant of a wizard, just going to push it into the backstory because I found it interesting, but I don't think it was enough to be like something to base a big part of the game on. Like I was saying earlier, like the reason why that kind of story stuff works in Hades is because it's like hot gods that players really want to interact with. And that's kind of how that game gets away with being a sort of skill-based, score-chasing, run-based game with a bit of story in, is because it has kind of specific things that make the story appealing. I just think, you know, the core audience for this is people that like Noita and Spelunky, and those games do perfectly fine without a story. So we're going to have that as like an implied backstory thing, I think, and then focus more on just having a big library of these funny little guys that want a glass of milk or whatever it is they want. Hot god. I mean, they are hot. That's why Hades works. Everyone's hot. You get to see really good artists' interpretation of these like characters that you know, right? Yeah, it's just got a specific set of things that make that work in that context. And yeah, although I do aspire to maybe one day make a game that has a bit more of a story, I just don't think this is a game that needs that. Or rather, the story that does exist in the game should be like a reward for doing certain things in the game, rather than something that you're expected to care about from the get-go, which is kind of what I was originally planning around. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is just sort of stepping outside yourself and just like giving myself the advice I would give to someone else if I was looking at their project, you know? Just like, okay, it's a cool idea, but does it really add value for the sort of person that would want to play this game? You know, is it worth your time to spend a lot of time on that aspect? Probably not. Whack. Okay, what I'm going to do before I log off is make a little... feel free to send me your brain dumps here if you want something included, but what I'm going to do is just come up with a list of diners that I've been thinking of as I've been working. So if you remember what I said earlier, I've got like... if you want to contribute an idea here, then please do. I've got these diners that I drew just because I thought they were funny ideas, and then I started playing around with the idea that some of them would drop a particular thing, right? So for example, diner cow person who cow person gives milk, right? Because then you've got this kind of mini game of remembering what all the different diners do, which I think is kind of part of the appeal of any sort of... It's not really a creature collector, but it's got the same sort of appeal of like, oh, I remember that if I give the druid a food, they give me a green book, that kind of stuff. The blacksmith gives me a key. The beholder gives me a red gem, all of that kind of stuff. So if you have an idea for like a funny fantasy or sci-fi creature that could show up as one of my diners and like give you a particular thing as a reward, then shout it out now, because I'm going to be adding some stuff to the spreadsheet about that kind of thing. Because this is like now this is a big bucket of content that I just need to gradually keep adding stuff to, those little animations and stuff. Anthony Bourdain. I would say diner, intergalactic politician of some sort. Some sort of like Zach Brannigan, no, like Zaphod Beeplebrox is who I'm thinking of. But yeah, I'm trying to... Some of them I will just like draw a doodle and see what ends up, and like maybe they don't give you anything specifically, but some of them I'll base them around like particular objects you get. Like this one, I just drew the shape. This one I didn't know what I was drawing, and I just sort of drew this shape, and then I was like, oh, what does that look like? And then that's what that character came from, which is quite a good exercise. Let's have a look at what... Can we include Figgy as a character? We absolutely must include Figgy. There's a special book item that drafts a copy of your entire deck into your deck, and when you feed Figgy... So Figgy is the mascot of Gleb's Room Loader library. I'm getting really meta now, but I totally will draw Figgy and put Figgy in the game. Oh yeah, sorry, Figgy isn't the Room Loader mascot. Figgy is the Figgy mascot, of course. But yeah, totally. I think that's fun. I mean, it's very much a the more the merrier kind of thing. With this sort of... Someone who wants to eat a bag of trash. That would be funny. Someone who wants to eat a bag of trash. Someone that wants to eat a toxic barrel. I think that needs to be a Godzilla type character though. Oh, Godzilla eats toxic barrel. Trash eating monster. Wild item giver. I'll just put that. I mean, some of the things are just going to be bizarre objects. They're probably just going to have like a tentacle on its own. These initial sketches were me just kind of like feeling out the design space. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like I think kind of what I'm thinking of with the set of characters is something similar to ToeJam and Earl. You know, like most things are humanoid. Most things are humanoid. We might occasionally have a character that is based on something quite surreal or like a kind of inanimate object or something. There can be a mix of fantasy tropes and more kind of sci-fi stuff. But I think everything should be slightly weird in a particular way. So for example, these two feel like very generic fantasy characters, and I might have to make them weirder. So our Gandalf and our Barbarian, like maybe the Barbarian should just have like one massive horn or something, or like a helmet with 3 eye holes, that kind of stuff. I just want them all to be slightly weird. I was thinking of a blacksmith, like a big buff blacksmith, and every time you serve him, you get a free key. And then having him as like a classic big buff blacksmith, but making the head into an anvil. So it's kind of like Pyramid Head from Silent Hill, but it's like anvil head. Mothman. I mean, the Mothman is the classic cryptid, right? Oh yeah, trash-eating monster raccoon. That's a great idea. They could be like a cool fantasy raccoon as well. They could be like the Puss in Boots from Shrek. Like, you know, they look like they're dressed up like a kind of classic D&D rogue, but they're clearly like a raccoon person, and they're just like, "Good sir, I would like a bag of your finest trash." Diner, water into wine. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know how I make that not feel bad. But I think there might be a fun way of doing that. Maybe it's not specifically Jesus. Maybe it's something else that just is like something dressed as Jesus or something. That's fun. Just gonna keep looking through the item library because I feel like the item library. Oh! What if the Mothman wants a lamp? You have to get one of these lamps and take it to the Mothman. That would be funny. Mothman lamp. Lamp question mark? I mean, it's not food, but I can make it food. I can brute force it in the system. Someone that wants a leaf. It could be like a snail person. Diner. Leaf eating snail. We gotta have a rabbit that only ever wants a carrot. So some of them will have like a range of stuff that they want. I think like they have a randomized selection of things that they might eat, and some of them will just always want a specific thing. And I think that kind of adds this layer to it of like, it's not really important that you understand, because you can always just walk up to them and they will tell you. But it creates this kind of micro game of remembering and like seeing them and just immediately knowing what they want, which I think is quite fun. I'm always looking for that in games. It's like, there's these little moments of like pleasure that are not really core to the game, but you know that you feel them as you play it. And like my example of this that I feel quite frequently is if I'm playing something like Slay the Spire and I see all of like the damage and stuff, but like there's like a split second where I try and quickly do the arithmetic to work out the damage outputs and stuff. And you don't actually need to do it to play the game in that particular moment, but I find it fun to do. And I think games that are really sticky often have those kind of little... It's not a guilty pleasure, but it's not necessarily something that people would say is the main thing that's fun about the game. But it ends up becoming this little micro game within a game. It's almost like, you know, last hitting in a MOBA or something. I think if you can like design little things like that into your game, like, you know, a little memory game where it's like you don't really need to play the memory game because you can just go and like ask the character. But yeah, I think there's something neat there. The cow gives you the milk. Maybe there's another character. Oh, we've got teeth as well. We've got giant teeth as an object, so we should probably have like a tooth fairy. I like the idea of having just a big slime. The slime should have a top hat. The slime should be like, it's just a classic Dungeons and Dragons gelatinous cube, but it's dressed up fancy to go out for a meal, so it's got like a top hat on. Oh, we should also have a mimic that looks like the relic chest. And it's not an enemy, it's just a diner, but it will just show up and it's like one of these chests with its mouth open and it wants something. That would be fun. And it wants a key. It wants one of the yellow keys that you normally use to open one of the relic chests. A diner that is a relic chest, eats key, gives relic? I mean, why not? That's kind of fun. There are flowers, yeah, we do have flowers in the game, so we can do stuff with flowers. We can have, like, you know, the rabbit, for example, could want a carrot and then later on in the game want a flower, because flowers are kind of more difficult to get because you have to, like, build a big level, because they don't grow over time, they grow over how many rooms you've built so far. So you can build a green room, it will have loads of these little shoots in, and then you build away and come back and they've grown into flowers. So yeah, we can have characters that want a specific flower, like they want a sunflower, because the way that they interact with these is they look for the sprite of the object that's being thrown at them, and that gives us quite a lot of flexibility. We can have a character that wants poop, or a big scarab beetle that wants some poop. And they could be like a big bug guy that's a scarab, but they've got like an Egyptian headdress on. They're like a, you know, they're like a holy Egyptian scarab priest. And they're like, you must bring me some poop. Bring me poop. A lot of these things aren't food, but that's fine. I mean, we can add more stuff. Let me have a look in the kind of food list is very like it's very sort of haphazardly put together so far. So it hasn't been like done in a very, very considerate way. But we've got ice cream, we've got kebabs, we've got omelets. I like the idea of like a dizzy egg character, like a big egg that wants to eat an egg. I think that's funny, like a cannibal egg. I'm just going to write cannibal egg, and I won't remember what that means, but fine. And what we can do is, like, you know, say that, let's say like just collecting an egg and giving them a raw egg is quite easy, but making an omelette is quite difficult. We can make it so that when that egg guy spawns, if your stars are below a certain amount, they just want an egg. But if your stars are above a certain amount, then they want the omelette or something. So we can have the same customer come back later, but like a harder version of the same customer because they want a different thing. Scotch egg. Oh, that would be good if we could have like a kind of something from Scottish folklore that wants a Scotch egg. Let's have a look. Scottish folklore creatures. I feel like the Loch Ness Monster is too obvious. A Kelpie or a Selkie. I thought they were Irish. Here we go. Fearsome foes from Scottish. No, Kelpies are from Scottish folklore, either exclusively or as well as. A vampire hunter that just wants a piece of garlic. That's very funny. I like that. A large black ghost-like cat with a tiny white patch on his chest. I mean, that would be a fun way to have a cat. The cat Sath. Okay, I'm just going to put Scottish spirit wants Scotch egg. I'm not even sure if Scotch eggs are actually authentically Scottish, but the gag is still funny. Seafood. That would be good for the diving suit guy, like a character in a diving suit seafood. I don't know what a We Free Men is, but I'm gonna write it here and look it up later. Mosquito that wants blood. That's fun. Tying a doppelganger. I put mosquito down. I haven't really done anything with blood, and I'm not sure if I will. There's like a tiny little blood effect when you get hit, but I'm not sure how how much we want to go into that. Because I like the kind of that we have a little bit of kind of disgusting horror stuff with some of the monsters and the fungus, but I'm not sure if I want it to actually go into there being like blood and guts and stuff. Oh, like a termite that wants to eat a barrel or a crate, like a wood-eating creature. There's a lot of non-food ideas here, but that's fine because some of these ideas will be like, okay, maybe the fairy occasionally wants a tooth, but maybe they just occasionally want a piece of fruit or something. I can work out those little kind of nuances later on, but just having a lot of these kind of funny relationships between a character and what they want is probably a good starting point. Because it just gives me lots of ideas for when I sit down to draw more of them. Also, kind of like creatures that eat more raw meat could be like a good beginner one because you don't have to cook the thing. So it's like a easier version. Raw meat, e.g., I don't know, like a werewolf or... like a character with a spear that exclusively eats kebabs. They're like, I'm not eating anything. I'm not eating anything unless it's on a pointy stick. You know, like those horsemen from Elden Ring that are like fake Mongolians? But one of those, and he's sitting there with a big spear. And every time you see him, you're like, oh, I'm going to have to make a kebab. I need to go and like deliberately trigger an arrow trap so I can make this guy his kebab. Why don't they ever eat anything else? These guys that love... They only want their food on a spear. That's fun. Yeah, some of these food items, I don't even know if they will stay in the game, but they're a good starting point. Probably just straight up have a Khajiit as well. I love a Khajiit. Just having a look through the lists. The pufferfish that wants a balloon. That's fun. I mean, it doesn't make that much sense to me, but it is very amusing, so I'll put it in the list. Bearable who? Hey, I wonder, maybe this has been asked before, but I notice you actually enjoy what you're doing, so you want to do it yourself. I wonder why? Smiley face. I think that should tell you everything that you need to know. AI is for people that want to do things that they don't actually enjoy. And there's lots of us who do enjoy doing things. So we don't want a tool that does it for us. If you use it and you find it helpful, great. Don't pester me about it though. Always really want to evangelize to other people about how helpful it is. I'm like, great. Great. I'd much rather have your tips on like how to I don't know, just something useful in my life that's not like trying to get rid of something that I do for fun. A mouth monster that wants many foods. We do have a scary mouth monster that doesn't really do much in the game yet. Wendigo, like a Wendigo. I'm quite loath to put a clown in, but I think a clown is a good idea. I mean, this helps to like retroactively give the rooms more value as well, because we've got like, we can start to have relationships between the library and the, yeah, I don't know, I can't think of examples, but like there's a particular room that is going to help you get the item for that particular character. So it all starts to kind of like come together in a big knot of interactions. I mean, the clown is a good use case for the balloon. The balloon doesn't work very well currently, but basically when you jump with it, your gravity changes so that you can float up in the air. And that would introduce a fun challenge of having you need to go through the level with a balloon in your hand, even though it kind of changes how jumping works. And if you like float up to the ceiling, then it pops. That could be very amusing. There are definitely foods on this list already where their kind of visual aspect isn't very clear. I'm going to keep these glow fruits in, but change them to be a different fruit. So they're not like just a different version of this purple fruit. They'll be like magical apples or something. And then some of these have been superseded. So this milk has been replaced by like a generic potion bottle that you can put milk or acid or whatever in. A tiny worm that wants an apple. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Oh, the other one is like maybe catching a fairy in a bottle and then someone wants that as a meal. That feels a bit mean, but like maybe it's a witch. Yeah, remember the system here is literally just the character determines what type of object they want, which can be one or a set. It can be one thing or it can be randomized from a set. And then it determines, they give us money and then they can give us an additional object. They don't have to give us an additional object, but that is part of the system. So we don't necessarily want to spec in anything at this stage where we need a behavior that falls outside of that. It's just like, this character wants this, and they give you this thing, and that's kind of the scope of what this system can do at the moment. So we don't really want to spec in anything that can be like a unique version of that until we've got a decent library of characters, up to a point where it's like, okay, now we can start maybe making special ones that do additional things. The fairy in a jar to a pirate, is that like a Peter Pan? Or is that a Peter Pan reference? That's fun. They would have to look like Hook for that to make sense though, right? A CEO eats a product. I do want to make like a candy cane or a lollipop that you can only get from the building the carnival and like getting those present boxes. I think that would be a good one. Oh, there's a couple that I've mentioned that I haven't put here yet as well. Like Diner, Druid gives you green book. Diner, Scientist gives you floppy disk. So the floppy disk is the blue equivalent of the red and green books. It just shuffles a blue room into your deck. Butcher gives you red book. That's maybe that could be like a pig butcher, like kind of a cross between the pigmen from Darkest Dungeon and the butcher abomination guy from Diablo, that kind of thing. And we're absolutely going to have an egg eating egg. It's just funny. Disturbing. I think if we're going to do video game references, we should go obscure with it. You know, just like stuff that people will recognize from similar games. So like a Binding of Isaac reference, a Noita reference, a Slay the Spire reference, rather than like a Mario or something. Like it'd be really funny to just have like what's that boss? It's not even a boss, it's like the... It's an elite. There's like an elite in Slay the Spire that's just these like 3 obelisks that exhaust you. Like just, oh, these, right? Like something like that. That's like a very recognizable thing from another game, but you'd have to be a nerd to recognize it because it's not something quite mainstream like Mario. It's like adjacent to the game in terms of the fandom that it would. But it's also like plausible deniability because that's such a weird geometric design, you know? Let me have a look. I'm going to have a look at that pepper. Oh. It pretty. Yeah, I like the way... I basically, I need to go through and like standardize the way that my food dishes are drawn at some point as well, because they're all like different angles and stuff, and I need to make them just generally look more pleasing. Like one of the things that we're going to be doing soon is Gleb has put these camera anchors in that can like pull the camera towards a particular point. So to make the serving customers feel more important, when they're like exploding with coins, we'll be able to drag the camera into that customer and make it feel like just a little bit more kind of like emotionally impactful and stuff like that. So making the actual food items look like little pixel art versions of beautiful anime food will be kind of helpful here. I'm going to put this in my Dirt World folder as my references. Anime cooking game ref. Diner, Slay the Spire reference. Diner, skeleton wants bone broth. I mean, the idea of feeding a skeleton full stop is just funny because it just kind of raises that immediate, like we don't get to see them close up, right? Because they're pixel art, so it just immediately raises that question of like, how does the eating here happen? Which I think is like a funny moment. Just like someone from Noita. I don't know who yet. Just like pick the character that people hate the most. Just have them show up. That would be funny. Yeah, there's a lot to kind of sort of ponder on there, which is good. Because initially I was just like drawing anything, and I hadn't really thought of this like additional mechanic of them occasionally giving you an extra thing. We should have someone that gives you a relic as well and make them look like sort of Indiana Jones or something. Yeah, we have like myconid enemies that are mushrooms, but it might just be funny to have a bigger one that wants to eat some sort of mushroom thing. I mean, like a third of the game is sort of scary mushroom themed, just because that's been part of it since the beginning. Really, was just part of this sort of aesthetic of how I make the scary parts of the game scary, is to make them kind of look like Caelid, make them all fungal and gross. So we can definitely do more stuff with mushroomy myconid type people. Yeah, maybe I need a brain that is just like you can serve someone a brain, and that's one of the items that the Indiana Jones character will want. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I like I said, if we do video game references, I would want to pick kind of relatively obscure indie games and put references to those in rather than any of the big ones. And that's not a legal thing. I think it's just you know, paying homage to things that we kind of don't get enough of that, you know? It's always kind of more interesting to me to sort of reference something kind of unusual that other people wouldn't reference versus putting like a very easy low-hanging fruit joke about Mario or Sonic or something in, you know? So maybe I just need to go deep on like weird dark fantasy characters, you know, like 80s fantasy movie characters ×2. And then like just obscure dark fantasy video game characters, like someone from like Dungeon Keeper or those kind of things. I think is kind of, because then if people don't know who they are, it just blends into being like a stock fantasy character. Whereas with like Mario, it's kind of like everyone will get the joke, and I think when everyone gets the joke, then the joke like kind of loses its power. So it's better to, I think, have a, like, I think if people want the really obvious, like I get all the jokes, I know who all these people are, then they would probably prefer to play Broforce or something like that, you know. Yeah, the name of the project will change as well. Not totally settled on that yet, but I've got some ideas. I'm gonna put some like chilies or something in it at some point as well, so we should have like a spicy dragon. A little chubby dragon that just wants a chili. Wants you to make something spicy. Right, I've got to go offline in a minute because I need to do dad stuff soon. I mean, we can have a character that just leaves poop behind, which is kind of gross, but it would be funny. Poop elemental. I mean, the reference I would really want to get in here as well is this guy. We've got to have this guy. Look at that butt. Have you ever seen a radish that thick? No Face is a good one. Definitely gonna do the radish guy though. I feel like No Face is more like the sort of thing where I do my own version of it, you know? But I do like that kind of character design where you've got like a kind of hooded thing and you can't tell if it's a person or a ghosty thing. We're gonna end up with so many poop eating customers that I need to introduce new ways of generating poop in the game. Currently you have to find goats and feed them and then they will poop. The reggae is getting more and more ridiculous the further down the playlist it gets. It's amazing. Yeah, I love the furnace guy. The little suit creatures. Yeah, so the other thing I need to do, which I haven't done yet, is like, because the original set of food that we came up with is very haphazard, and like the combinations of recipes to make some of these things, it was just sort of like hacked in at the start. What I probably need to do now is go, okay, if we've got this bank of diners who just want like any of the vegetarian foods, for example, or any of the meaty foods, like what's in that category? Because at the moment I haven't balanced that in terms of like the amount of items and how easy or difficult they are to cook, because it wasn't an important part of the game early on. And now it's becoming a more important part of the game. I'm going to have to go through and go, okay, you know, we have this, like with food items, okay, we have just like a raw meat, like a very easy customer, like a werewolf will just have a piece of raw meat. And then we've got like a piece of meat that you've cooked over a fire. That's like the next difficulty. Then you've got like a meat stew that you have to cook yourself. That's another difficulty. And the kebab, where you have to like cook it, but you also need to get an arrow trap arrow. That's the next tier of difficulty for that kind of customer. So I need to do some of that type of thinking that I haven't done yet, and like start to develop more items to go in this list based on like, oh, we've only got 4 meat items and we've got like 12 plant-based items, or that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's just something that will kind of start happening soon, I guess, now that I've pivoted to it being more about that sort of stuff. I'm going to wrap it up now, folks, because I need to get on and do some other stuff. Thank you so much for joining today. It's been quite fun. I got to think out loud about the project for a bit at the start, which is always helpful to do anyway, because it helps me rationalize what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Hopefully, you know, there wasn't too much repetition if you've been around before in the last couple of weeks. And then, yeah, we got the new bookcases in. You kind of saw how that works a little bit. And yeah, you guys helped me brainstorm a bunch of ideas for customers, which is really helpful, because it basically means like a lot of these, the way that the workflow happens with these guys, you know, I was saying on stream the other day, I really like drawing on a tablet because it means there's something productive I can do, but I don't have to be sitting at my work computer, and I can go and like sit with the kids when they're watching TV, and I can draw something, but I can still sort of be engaged with what they're doing. And that's quite helpful to like have a time where I can sort of be in the middle of working on my game, but also not being kind of away in the office on my own kind of thing. So a lot of the diners that I drew already, you know, they're starting as a sketch on the tablet, and then when I add the idle animation, I do it on here, you know. So that's why we've got an idle animation for the beholder, because that was like a quick one to just load in and move some stuff around each frame. But a lot of these ideas, I will go to that list when I'm sitting down in the lounge and just pick like 4 of them and go, okay, I'll draw that guy today. And then, yeah, implement them and add the animations later in the engine. So you've seen a lot of how that works today. So hopefully, if nothing else, it's just kind of validating. I always like having a glimpse into other people's process for things like asset workflows and stuff, because you kind of realize that it's always a bit of a weird, the like pipeline that people build for their projects is always just a weird kind of confluence of what they personally find quick and easy to use, and all of that kind of stuff. Thank you for joining, and catch you another time. Goodbye.